She spent $250 on a useless house in the woods. She thought it was a mistake until she saw what was hidden behind the wall. Subscribe and write in the comments which city you are watching from. Amelia Kirsten had never been the kind of woman who ran from problems, but the past year had left her feeling as though she had been quietly eroded from the inside. Divorce had taken more from her than just a ring and shared furniture. It had stripped layers she didn't know she wore, leaving behind someone she barely recognized. Her apartment felt too small, her job too mechanical, and most days she caught herself staring into nothing, unable to explain the heaviness that followed her everywhere. The morning she decided to go hiking, she woke up earlier than usual. Not because she slept well, sleep had become something her body no longer understood, but because something inside urged her out of the apartment. She stood by her window for a long moment, watching the gray light of dawn collect on the distant rooftops. Her breath fogged the glass, and for a second, Ona thought about turning back, crawling into bed, living another day that felt like all the others. But the apartment walls felt too tight, too close, as if they were leaning inward. The decision came not in words, but in motion. She grabbed her backpack, filled her thermos, and stepped outside into the crisp, early autumn air. The road out of the city was nearly empty at that hour. Amelia rolled down her window and let the cold wind slap her awake. Trees blurred into deep green and rusty orange on both sides of the highway. She drove past gas stations, diners with flickering signs, and stretches of forgotten farmland that always made her wonder who still lived there. She did not know why this hike mattered. She only knew that she needed to breathe somewhere that wasn't filled with the noise of her life. The trail she chose wasn't popular. Perhaps that was part of the appeal. It wound through a forest dense enough to swallow sound. When she parked her car at the small gravel clearing, she saw only two other vehicles, both covered in a thin layer of dust. Birds were just beginning to stir. The sky looked like brushed steel. She zipped up her jacket, adjusted the straps of her backpack, and started down the path. Fallen needles from pine trees made the ground soft, almost springy, muffling her steps. The leaves overhead formed a shifting canopy that filtered the pale morning light. She felt the tension in her shoulders begin to loosen, if only slightly. Her breath fell into rhythm with her steps, and for the first time in months, she felt the quiet inside her was not suffocating, but comforting. Here, at least, nothing demanded anything from her. Hours passed as she walked. The trail curled between ancient trees scarred by storms, dipped into shallow ravines where damp earth clung to her boots, then rose again toward sunlit clearings. Somewhere in the middle of the hike, Amelia found her thoughts wandering to her marriage, not in the sharp, painful way they usually did, but as if she were watching a film she had already seen too many times. The arguments that always circled back to nothing. The final conversation at the kitchen table, the way he avoided her eyes when he said he was done, pretending they could fix anything. She realized, with a bitter kind of acceptance, that she had not been grieving him. She had been grieving herself. The trail became steeper as the terrain sloped upward, forcing her to stop more frequently and steady her breathing. As she climbed, the trees thinned, and the sky opened wider above her. That was when she saw it. At first it looked like a shadow, an unnatural break in the vertical lines of the forest. Then, as she stepped onto a higher ridge, it came fully into view. A house, or what was left of one. It stood on an incline, as though clinging to the hillside, its frame slightly tilted, its boards sun-bleached to a washed-out gray. The roof sagged toward the center. A porch leaned so heavily to one side that it seemed a strong wind might push it the rest of the way down. It didn't belong there. Not on the hiking trail, not this deep in the woods. Something about the sight of it made her stop mid-step. The house was not merely abandoned, it looked forgotten. forgotten in the way an old photograph fades until the faces become ghosts. Amelia felt a strange current run through her, a mixture of curiosity and something like recognition. She had never been here. She had never seen a picture of this place. Yet a part of her felt as though she had walked toward it before, in some other life or dream. She approached with caution, stepping over gnarled tree roots and patches of moss. The closer she got, the more details she could see. The peeling paint, the broken shutters hanging by rusted hinges, the faint outline of what might once have been a second-story balcony. A window on the upper floor was missing its glass entirely, leaving only a jagged frame that gaped like an open mouth. But what made her stop, truly stop, was the moment she thought she saw a flicker of movement behind the darkness of that window. It lasted only a second, so brief she could have imagined it. She told herself it was a trick of the light, or maybe a bird shifting past inside. But the way her skin prickled told another story. She lifted her phone and took several photos. When she zoomed in on the top window, the shadows looked deeper, thicker, suspiciously shaped. Yet the longer she held the image, the more the shadow dissolved into the uneven grain of the wood. She was alone, she reminded herself. No one else had any reason to be in that house. The wind picked up, brushing past her and rattling the loose boards. A hollow thud echoed from inside, as if a door had swung shut. Amelia stepped back. The air felt suddenly cooler. She did not want to investigate the house further. Not now. Not alone. The trail continued past the clearing, and though a pull tugged at her chest, some silent invitation urging her forward, she forced herself to turn away. She walked quickly, occasionally glancing back over her shoulder. Each time she did, she had the disturbing impression that the house looked a little different, as though adjusting itself when she wasn't watching. By the time she reached the car, the sun was dipping toward the treetops. The hike had taken longer than she expected, but she did not feel tired. She felt unsettled. The house occupied her mind the entire drive home. She replayed the moment she thought she saw movement, the echo inside the walls, the eerie stillness. She told herself she was imagining things, that people see shapes in clouds, snakes in branches, and faces in windows when they want meaning in the meaningless. But deep down, she knew that what she felt wasn't imagination. It was a connection. Thin, inexplicable, but real. Back in her small apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. She showered, changed into warm clothes, and made tea, but nothing grounded her. She sat on the couch with her laptop open and the photos loaded onto the screen. The house looked even more out of place in digital clarity. The forest behind it, a blurred backdrop of vertical lines, made the structure appear almost staged, as though it had been placed there by some unseen hand. She zoomed in again on the upper window. The shape she had noticed earlier was still there, not defined, not sharp, but suggestive. A curve of darkness where no shadow should logically fall. A sliver of reflective sheen where glass should not exist. She felt the pull intensify, as though the house were whispering through the screen. She exhaled slowly and leaned back. This was absurd. It was just an old building. But as the minutes passed, Amelia found herself reopening the same image, studying it from different angles, as though the answer she sought hid somewhere within the pixels. Late that night, unable to sleep, she searched for abandoned houses in the region. After scrolling through pages of real estate auctions, overlooked lots, and county records, she found it. The same house. Listed as Lot 47. Starting bid, $250. Property condition, not inhabitable. Structural instability. Ownership, no active claims. There were older notes attached to the listing, comments about previous attempts to auction it, but none were successful. Every few years the city reposted the property, and every few years it sat unsold. She clicked through archived comments from local residents. Some mentioned strange noises. Others wrote that no contractor ever stayed long enough to finish an inspection. One person claimed they had seen lights flickering inside the house at night, even though it had no electrical connection. But most comments carried a different tone, not afraid, but resigned. "Leave it," someone wrote. "That house isn't for us." Another said, "It'll get the right owner someday." She stared at the screen for a long time. The words had a weight she couldn't explain, as if the house had a destiny tied to someone, and she had stumbled into its path. By morning, she had looked at the listing so many times she memorized its details. She didn't remember making the decision. It didn't come as a thought or a plan. It came the same way stepping outside had an instinctual pull stronger than doubt. She filled out the application for the upcoming municipal auction. When she pressed submit, a strange calm settled over her, like the moment before a storm when the world holds its breath. The house in the woods stayed in her mind the entire day. Its broken silhouette, its leaning frame, its silent presence. Everything about it felt unfinished, as though it had been waiting for something, or someone, for a very long time. Amelia didn't know why she did it. She only knew she would go to the auction. And for the first time in months, she felt her life shifting. Not backward, not sideways, but towards something she could not yet name. The morning of the auction arrived with a gray sky and a mild drizzle that misted against Amelia's windshield as she drove toward the municipal building. She had slept poorly, waking several times with the image of the forest house lingering in her mind like a half-formed dream. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the leaning porch, the broken shutters, the dark window, where she thought she saw a flicker of movement. She didn't feel frightened, only drawn, as though a thread connected her to that hillside and tugged a little harder each hour. The auction room was nothing like she imagined. Instead of a bustling hall filled with competitive bidders, she found a small, fluorescent-lit conference space with a scattering of plastic chairs and a dry erase board listing the order of lots. Most people there were middle-aged men in work boots and baseball caps, sipping coffee from foam cups and chatting casually about other properties. A woman behind a fold-up table checked people in with the weary politeness of someone who had done the same task for years. When Amelia gave her name, the woman raised an eyebrow, just slightly, as though surprised she wasn't a contractor or investor. "Here for a residential lot?" the woman asked, shuffling papers. "Yes," Amelia said. The woman glanced at her again, eyes narrowing with the faintest glimmer of curiosity. "Lot 47?" she asked, her voice neutral. Amelia hesitated only a second before answering. "Yes." The woman nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, and handed her a bidding card. No comment, no warning, no story. Yet Amelia sensed something unspoken in the way the woman's gaze lingered on her for just a moment too long. The auction moved quickly. The first several properties sold for modest amounts, small parcels on the outskirts of town, or homes needing renovations, but still salvageable. People raised their cards lazily, chatting between bids. When the auctioneer reached Lot 47, his tone shifted, if only slightly. "Next, we have Lot 47, he announced. "Unclaimed structure, rural zone. Opening bid at $250. The room grew quieter, though the change was subtle. A few people glanced at one another, then looked away. No one raised a card. Amelia felt the familiar pressure in her chest again, the same pull she felt in the forest. She lifted her bidding card. The auctioneer paused, surprised. His gaze drifted across the room to see if anyone else would bid. No one did. Some men stared at the floor. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When it became clear no one intended to counter, the auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sold for $250, he said. sounding almost relieved to move on. When the session ended, Amelia signed the necessary paperwork. A different official, an older man with thinning white hair and a polite but cautious expression, handed her the deed. He adjusted his glasses, studying her face as if trying to understand something he wouldn't dare ask aloud. "You should know," he said quietly. "That house has been on the docket for a long time. Not many people take an interest." "I saw it during a hike," Amelia replied, unsure why she felt the need to explain herself. "I see," the man murmured. He tapped the corner of the deed lightly. "Well, it's yours now. Best of luck." There was no ceremony, no dramatic moment. She walked out of the building with a thin folder under her arm and a sensation in her chest that felt impossibly heavy and light at the same time. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and cool. She breathed deeply, finding the scent of wet pavement oddly invigorating. She drove straight to the house. The forest road seemed different this time, less foreign, more familiar, though she had only walked it once. The branches arched over the gravel path like an old cathedral of interlocked limbs. Her tires crackled over fallen leaves. The hillside appeared before she expected it, and suddenly she found herself staring at the house again, this time from the driver's seat. It looked even more unsteady than she remembered. The gray boards were blotched with darker stains from the recent rain, and the roof sagged heavily, as though weighed down by decades of forgotten stories. The porch leaned further to one side, and tall weeds pushed through its broken planks. Yet something about the house seemed awake now, as if it had sensed her return. Carrying her backpack and a toolbox, she approached the front steps. The door hung loosely on its hinges. A rusty iron latch clung to a rotting plank, but the lock was broken, as though someone had pried it open long ago. When she pushed the door, it swung inward with a low groan. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old wood, and something sweeter-faded lilies or dried herbs. The floorboards creaked under her weight. She stood still for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the crooked windows. Her breath caught when she noticed small details she hadn't been close enough to see before. The living room held a sagging couch draped in a sheet that had turned gray with time. A wooden rocking chair sat nearby, covered in a thin layer of dust, yet positioned as though someone had been sitting there only a short while ago. The fireplace contained cold ashes that didn't look as old as they should have been. Amelia knelt beside it, brushing her fingers gently across the gray powder, surprised to find faint traces of blackened wood beneath her touch. She walked through the rooms slowly, taking in everything. A photograph hung crookedly on the wall. It showed a man, a woman, and a small child standing in front of the very house she now owned. Their heads had been crudely cut out of the photo, leaving empty silhouettes. The jagged edges where the paper had been torn gave the picture an unsettling feeling, as though someone had tried to erase the family entirely. In the kitchen, she found cabinets with chipped paint and rusted hinges. Plates and utensils sat neatly arranged, as if the family had simply left one morning and never returned. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but beneath it, she sensed order. Intentionality. Not chaos. A soft creak echoed from upstairs. Amelia froze. She told herself it was the wind, the settling of old beams, the natural groans of a century-old house. But the sound had been specific. A footstep. Light. Cautious but unmistakable. She gripped her phone tightly, her pulse quickening, and forced herself up the stairs. The air on the second floor felt colder. The hallway was narrow, its wallpaper peeling in strips like shedding skin. 2 doors lined the corridor. One hung crookedly on a hinge, revealing a bedroom with a broken dresser and a bare mattress. The other room's door was cracked open just enough to reveal darkness. Another sound came this time behind her. When she spun around, nothing was there. The house seemed to breathe around her, wood groaning, old nails settling deeper into soft beams. She exhaled shakily, feeling foolish, and pushed open the second door. It was a bedroom, clearly once belonging to adults. Dust coated the dresser and nightstands. A cracked mirror hung above the vanity, reflecting a warped image of the room. But what drew her immediately was the heavy oak wardrobe against the wall. It was far larger than modern wardrobes and intricately carved with patterns she didn't recognize. Swirls, lines, something like stylized wings. It looked out of place in such a modest home. Amelia approached it and wrapped her fingers around one of the metal handles. When she pulled, the door barely budged. She tugged harder, but it remained stubbornly in place. She crouched down to investigate and discovered something unexpected. Metal bolts at the base of the wardrobe, screwed directly into the floorboards. Someone had fastened the wardrobe to the ground deliberately. Her heartbeat quickened. She ran her hand along the side of the wardrobe, following the edge until she felt a faint indentation behind it. A line in the wall. A seam. There was something behind the wardrobe. A door. She stepped back, staring at the bolts that held the massive furniture in place. It wasn't just heavy. It had been secured. Someone had wanted to keep whatever was behind it, hidden. As she stood there, the temperature in the room seemed to dip. The silence pressed harder against her ears. Something shifted inside her, a blend of fear and certainty, as though the house was holding its breath alongside her. Not today, she told herself. She didn't have the tools. She didn't have the courage. Not yet. She backed away slowly, her eyes never leaving the wardrobe, and walked downstairs. The house felt heavier now, not hostile, but watchful, as if it knew she had discovered one of its secrets. Before she left, she stood at the front door and looked back at the living room. The rocking chair seemed angled differently than she remembered, facing slightly more toward the window. She shook her head, refusing to dwell on the detail, and stepped outside. The air felt warmer beyond the porch, and she inhaled deeply, filling her lungs. She began the walk back to her car, the forest quiet around her. But every few steps, she felt the faintest sensation between her shoulder blades, the distinct awareness of being watched. When she reached the road, she couldn't help turning back. Through the tangled branches, the house stood silent and gray. But something in its posture felt changed. Less sleeping, more awake. On the drive home, she couldn't shake the image of the wardrobe bolted to the floor or the thin vertical seam behind it. Whatever lay hidden there, whoever put it there, had meant for it to remain secret. But the house had let her find it, and she knew she would return. Not out of fear, not even out of curiosity, but because something inside that house was waiting for her, calling her. When she reached her apartment, she noticed dirt on her shoes she didn't remember stepping in, and a faint scent of old wood that lingered on her jacket. Even after she showered, the smell seemed to follow her. It was as if the house had marked her somehow, claimed her in a way she did not yet understand. That night, as she lay in bed replaying the day, one thought rose above all others. The house wasn't abandoned. It had simply been waiting. Amelia returned to the house earlier than she expected. 2 restless nights had passed since the moment she saw the bolts anchoring the wardrobe to the floor, and both nights had ended the same way. With her waking in the dark, heart racing, the image of that carved oak surface burned into her thoughts. She told herself more than once that she should leave the house alone, at least until she had time to gather her thoughts. But logic dissolved easily when matched against the pull she felt. There was something behind that wardrobe, something the house wanted her to discover. She could no longer pretend otherwise. The road to the property seemed shorter now, almost familiar in its bends and curves. When she stepped out of her car, The air felt colder than it should have been for mid-autumn, and a thin layer of frost glistened along the railing of the broken porch. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house felt different, not louder or more alive, but expectant, as if aware that she had returned with purpose. She went straight to the stairs, climbing them slowly, every creak of the wood echoing up the narrow hallway. When she reached the bedroom with the wardrobe, she paused in the doorway. The morning light filtering in through the cracked window cast long stripes across the floor, illuminating dust particles drifting lazily in the air. For a moment, she simply stood there, grounding herself. She pulled out the tools she brought, screwdriver, crowbar, and a small flashlight, and approached the wardrobe. Up close, the carvings were even more intricate than she remembered, swirling patterns that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles. She ran her fingertips across the surface, feeling grooves worn smooth by years of touch. Whatever family had owned this wardrobe had valued it deeply. Amelia crouched down and examined the bolts again. They were old, their metal mottled with rust, but they had been secured with precision. Someone had intended for the wardrobe to stay in place for a very long time. With careful pressure, she began loosening the first bolt, each twist sending metallic flakes to the floor. The sound echoed dully through the room. She worked through the others, sweat gathering along her neck despite the cold. As she finished the last bolt, a deep creak resonated behind her. She jerked upright, flashlight raised, but nothing moved. The house was silent. She exhaled slowly and gripped the side of the wardrobe, pushing with all her strength. It resisted at first, as though rooted into the floor, but after several seconds it began to slide. Dust rose in thick clouds from beneath its base, swirling upward like disturbed memories. The moment the wardrobe shifted fully away from the wall, Amelia froze. There it was, a narrow wooden door, nearly the same color as the wall, so expertly fitted that it would have been invisible had she not known exactly where to look. The door had no knob, only a faint indentation where someone might pry it open with fingertips. A thin line of darker wood marked the frame. It looked undisturbed, sealed for decades. Her hands trembled as she pressed her palm against the surface. The wood was cold, unnaturally cold, and as she applied pressure, the door groaned softly, shifting just enough to reveal a sliver of darkness beyond. She slipped her fingers into the crack and pulled. The hinges screamed at first, their voices the sharp cry of metal long unused, but after several seconds, the door gave way. A breath of stale, icy air escaped the hidden space. The darkness inside felt heavier than natural shadow, but Amelia forced herself to step closer, shining her flashlight into the opening. A narrow corridor stretched downward at a steep angle, its walls lined with aged wooden planks. She felt a chill run through her, not from fear, but from the strange sense that she was stepping into something profoundly preserved untouched by time. She took a step inside. The floor creaked under her weight, but it held. She moved slowly, one hand trailing along the wall to steady herself, the other holding the flashlight ahead of her. The beam illuminated the descending passage, revealing dust-covered steps leading down into deeper darkness. Her breath echoed softly in the confined space. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor widened into a small room. Amelia stopped at the threshold, breath catching. The room looked untouched by decay, as if sealed away from the world outside. It was furnished like a child's bedroom frozen in the mid-century. A small bed, neatly made with a patterned quilt, a wooden nightstand with a faded lamp, a simple desk with worn corners, and shelves lined with children's toys blocks, a wooden horse, a patched cloth doll whose stitched smile had faded with time. But what struck her most was the stillness. It wasn't the absence of sound that unsettled her, but the sense that the room had been waiting, preserved with deliberate care, protected. Amelia stepped inside, running her fingers over the quilt on the bed. It was soft, dusty, but intact. She opened the drawer of the nightstand and found nothing except a single sheet of paper, folded carefully in half. Hands shaking, she unfolded it. The message was written in a hurried but elegant hand. "Whoever finds this, please help us. We didn't leave. We didn't run. They forced us to disappear." Her breath stopped. The note held no signature, but the meaning was unmistakable. Fear radiated from each letter. She looked up, scanning the room again. Beside the desk was a small wardrobe filled with children's clothes. Shirts no bigger than her forearm, pants with patches sewn carefully onto the knees, shoes too small even for a toddler. Everything neatly folded, arranged with love. A thick lump formed in her throat. Someone had lived in this room. A child had slept here, played here, hidden here, survived here, if only for a while. The walls were decorated with hand-painted stars and little clouds, the colors muted by time. She touched one of the stars, feeling the bumps of the brushstrokes. It broke her heart in a way she didn't expect. Then her flashlight beam caught on something unusual on the far wall, a symbol. Scrawled in dark ink, or perhaps old paint, the symbol resembled a circle with 3 intersecting lines pointing inward, like a crude compass or a sealed eye. It had been painted with force, the strokes uneven, the pressure visible in the wood grain. It seemed less a drawing and more a warning. The longer she stared at it, the more unease crept into her bones. She reached out to touch it but stopped herself. Something deep inside whispered not to. She turned toward the desk. A thin notebook rested beneath a layer of dust. She brushed it clean and carefully opened the cover. The first pages were blank, but halfway through, the words began. The handwriting differed from the note, more delicate, more patient. A woman's hand. October 3rd, 1971. They came again last night. My husband says they're getting desperate. He won't give them what they want. I'm afraid for our boy. We made the room for him, for safety, for whatever comes next. Amelia closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. She continued. October 7th. This house is no longer ours. It belongs to their shadows, to their whispered threats. They told him he must cooperate. He will not. God help us. October 11th. The child still asks when he can go outside. I tell him soon. I pray I'm not lying. The final entries grew more frantic, ink smudged, and sentences incomplete. The last one sent a shiver through Amelia's entire body. October 19th. They are inside. If anyone ever reads this, please remember us. The entry ended abruptly, the pen stroke trailing into a frantic smear. She closed the notebook, her heart aching. A family had been trapped here, a child hidden away from something terrible. And the rest of the world had gone on, forgetting them entirely. She explored further, searching for any clue, any trace of what had happened after those final words. Behind the bed, she noticed a loose floorboard and pried it up carefully. Beneath it lay a small tin container. Inside, folded meticulously, were more documents. Birth certificates, letters, a list of names with dates beside them. The last few names had been crossed out violently. Amelia recognized the pattern. Crossed out names meant removal, elimination. Suddenly, the air in the room felt thinner. She swallowed back a surge of panic and sat down on the edge of the bed, clutching the tin. The truth was larger than she expected, darker than she imagined. She needed to bring these to someone who could help, someone who could investigate this properly. The journalist came to mind almost instantly. She had seen his articles before, detailed reports on unresolved local cases, corruption, missing persons. He had a reputation for digging up what authorities tried to bury. She couldn't do this alone. The house had shown her enough to know that the story did not end here. A sound came then, a soft, unmistakable tap from the hallway above the hidden staircase. Her breath caught as she turned off her flashlight, plunging the room into darkness except for the dim slivers of daylight filtering through the cracks behind her. She listened. The sound came again. Slow, measured, like someone stepping carefully across the old wooden floorboards. Amelia stood, clutching the tin container, and moved toward the passage. The tapping stopped. Silence swelled, heavy and suffocating. When she emerged into the upstairs bedroom, the air felt colder than before. She turned her head slowly, scanning the room, but saw nothing. Only the wardrobe she had pushed aside earlier, its massive bulk casting long shadows across the floor. Then she noticed something on the bedspread, the notebook, the one she had left on the desk in the hidden room. It now sat neatly atop the dusty blanket as though placed with care. The house wasn't trying to frighten her, it was guiding her. Or warning her. Either way, the message was clear. She had uncovered the family's secret. Now she had to uncover the town's. The house had given her its truth. Now it waited for what she would do with it. Amelia tightened her grip on the tin container and the notebook. She stepped out of the room, down the stairs, and out into the cold afternoon light. Behind her, the house stood silent, holding decades of unanswered questions within its walls. But not for much longer. Amelia drove back to the city with the tin container on the passenger seat beside her, its metal rattling softly each time the car hit a bump in the road. Her knuckles were white around the steering wheel. The forest seemed to recede too slowly in the rearview mirror, as if reluctant to release her. Even once the trees gave way to open fields, she could feel the house behind her, felt its memory settle across her shoulders like a dense, invisible weight. The documents, the notebook, the room, the symbol, the list of names, they no longer felt like artifacts of the past. They were pieces of a truth that had been suffocated for half a century, waiting for someone to bring them back into the light. She didn't go home. She drove straight to the small office building downtown where the journalist worked, a man known for chasing old stories others preferred to bury. His articles had exposed corrupt departments, mishandled investigations, forgotten crimes. If anyone could understand the magnitude of what she had found, it was him. When she entered the building, the receptionist looked up, startled. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," Amelia said, hugging the tin container tight against her ribs. "But I need to see Mr. Hollis. It's urgent." Urgency was a word people in this office heard frequently, Amelia suspected, because the receptionist looked unimpressed. She opened her mouth to ask for details, but before she could, a door behind her creaked open. A tall, lean man with tired but sharp eyes stepped into the hallway. His hair was graying at the temples, his shirt wrinkled as though he'd slept in it, and his expression carried the wary alertness of someone used to bad news. "What kind of urgent?" he asked. Amelia turned to him. Something in her face must have struck him, because his eyebrows lowered with concern. "It's a long story," she said quietly. "And it's not just a story. I found something. A room hidden inside a house, a family, a child, a disappearance that wasn't a disappearance." Hollis stared at her for a long moment, before jerking his head toward his office. "Come in." His office was cramped, overflowing with stacks of papers, old binders, and cardboard boxes. A bulletin board covered one wall entirely, pinned with maps, photographs, and articles in overlapping layers. The room felt like a mind turned inside out, thoughts externalized in ink and thumbtacks. Amelia placed the tin container and the notebook on his desk. Her hands shook slightly. Hollis watched her with a mix of caution and curiosity. "What is this?" he asked. She took a deep breath and began from the beginning, the strange pull she felt toward the house, finding it in the woods, the auction, the eerie interior, the bolted wardrobe. As she spoke of the hidden door, Hollis leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. When she described the child's room preserved in silence, the diary entries, the note on the wall, the symbol, the sound of footsteps, the notebook appearing on the bed, Hollis rubbed his jaw, his eyes flickering with recognition. He opened the notebook gently, turning the pages with care, more suited to a curator than a journalist. His fingers stilled when he reached the final entries. Amelia watched him swallow hard. "My God," he whispered. "I've heard rumors, old stories about a family that vanished, about men who ran the town behind closed doors, about something happening in the early 70s. People were too scared to talk, or too ashamed." He opened the tin container next. Birth certificates, letters, government documents folded into perfect squares, a list of names, some crossed out, some circled, some underlined. "This," he said, lifting the list, "is exactly what I've been missing. Something real. Something I can use." "What happened to them?" Amelia asked, voice trembling. Hollis shook his head slowly. "I don't know. But this changes things. Amelia, do you realize what you found? This isn't just a cold case. It's a cover-up, probably one that shaped the town for decades." He stood up abruptly and began pulling files from his shelves, comparing dates, names, old clippings. His energy shifted entirely. No longer cautious, but electrified. "We start today," he said. "We dig. We interview. We cross-check. This won't be quick or easy, but if we do it right—" He paused, meeting her eyes. "We might be able to give them justice." The next weeks passed in a blur of motion. Amelia met with former police officers now living in retirement homes, their memories blurred by time but not completely erased. She listened as elderly residents hesitated before admitting they had heard screams one night long ago or seen strange vehicles parked near the woods. She sat through interviews where people broke down crying, ashamed for staying silent out of fear. Hollis documented everything, cross-referencing every detail with the documents she had found. Together, they reconstructed a fractured story. In the early 70s, a small group of powerful men, business owners, administrators, law enforcement figures, had controlled land disputes and financial dealings in the region. Amelia's house stood on a piece of land they coveted. The father of the child in the hidden room had refused to sign away his rights. After months of threats, the family vanished. Official records stated they relocated voluntarily. Witnesses who might have contradicted that were intimidated or bribed. But the notebook proved otherwise. A family had been hunted. A child had been hidden. Something unspeakable had happened inside that house. As the investigation grew, local news stations picked up hints of the story. Hollis received anonymous messages, some warning him to stop, others thanking him for pursuing the truth. Amelia found her days consumed with interviews and documents until the timelines, names, and details spun endlessly in her mind. And through all of it, the house waited. She returned often, not out of obligation, but a strange sense of companionship. Each time she walked through the front door, the house felt a little different, as though shedding layers of old sorrow. The air no longer felt suffocating. The shadows no longer clung to the corners with the same heaviness. She cleaned room by room, gently brushing dust off shelves and windowsills, careful not to disturb the things that felt like memories. Sometimes she spoke softly into the empty rooms, though she never expected an answer. She only felt that the house listened. One evening, as she worked on tidying the living room, she felt a sudden warmth on her shoulder. Not like sunlight or a draft, but like a soft, steady presence. When she turned, no one was there. But she wasn't startled. She simply smiled. The house was no longer warning her, was thanking her. The investigation built momentum. Hollis published the first article, a carefully structured account of the family's disappearance, supported by historical records and bits of testimony. The uproar was immediate. Citizens demanded answers. Officials tried to minimize the story, but cracked under public pressure. More witnesses came forward. More pieces emerged. The truth began to surface. Eventually, after months of pressure, the state reopened the case officially. Those responsible were questioned older now, slower, but unable to evade their past. Some confessed. Others stayed silent. But silence was no longer enough to protect them. In a public statement, the town acknowledged the family's suffering. A formal apology was issued. The forgotten were remembered at last. But more importantly, the house was recognized as a historical landmark, a place where truth had been hidden and later resurrected, a memorial to a family whose story had nearly been erased. The day the historical marker was installed, Amelia stood outside the house, watching workers cement the plaque into the ground. She felt a strange tenderness rising through her chest, a sense of closure mixed with gratitude. The house had found its voice again. Its history was no longer buried in dust and darkness. When the workers left, she walked inside. The evening sunlight spilled across the floor in warm gold, touching the old boards with gentle glow. She made her way up the stairs to the child's hidden room. She had cleaned it carefully weeks earlier, preserving every object exactly where it had been. But when she reached the room, something new awaited her. On the windowsill sat the wooden horse. She froze, breath catching in her throat. She had left the toy inside the wardrobe in the hidden room. She hadn't touched it since. Now it perched neatly in the light, its carved ears casting small shadows. But again, she felt no fear, only a deep, quiet understanding. She walked across the room, picked up the wooden horse, and held it gently in her hands. The wood was warm, warmer than it should have been. She placed it carefully on a shelf beside the diary and the child's patched doll. A soft peace settled inside her, as though the house had exhaled after holding its breath for 50 years. "You're safe now," she whispered, unsure whether she spoke to the room, the child who once lived here, or the house itself. Outside, the sky shifted into shades of lavender and rose. She opened the window, letting the cool breeze drift inside. The air smelled fresh pine, earth, the faint sweetness of autumn. For the first time in years, Amelia felt anchored. She had come to the forest lost, hollowed by grief, but the house had given her purpose. In return, she had given it peace. She rested her hand on the windowsill, watching the trees sway gently below. A quiet truth settled inside her, one she didn't question. This was home. Not because she owned it, but because she belonged to it now, woven into its story as surely as those who had come before. And for the first time in a very long time, she felt ready for whatever came next. Subscribe to the channel, watch the next videos, and share this one with others.